Will UCF play more disciplined football under Scott Frost? We think so.
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in to Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every single day. On today's show, we're talking about some statistics from last season on UCF to set the conversation about where the Knights were and where we hope they will go in 2025. We're going to start with Redzone defense, talk about the results versus what they had. And at the end of the show, we're going to talk about whether this will be a more disciplined team under Scott Frost and how we feel that'll pay dividends for UCF in 2025. Let's start with Redzone defense. UCF hired Alex Grinch as defensive coordinator. This was a great hire. It was praised by many who know football, including us here at Locked On UCF. The four-time nominee and two-time Broyles Award semifinalist has accomplished quite a bit. As a matter of fact, everywhere he's gone, defense has improved. And UCF has some notable areas on defense that they are going to need to improve if they're going to win more football games next year. Let's start with Red Zone defense. Red Zone defense was atrocious. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, Mike G, how atrocious was it? The Knights were dead last in the Big 12 in Red Zone defense, allowing a staggering 90% touchdown rate when UCF opponents were in the red zone. 90%. Like I said, that's bad. That joins the likes of Cincinnati, Iowa State, and TCU as worst in the conference, giving up touchdowns in the red zone. And certainly, this needs to be said. It's kind of an obvious statement, but if you want to win football games, you've got to keep teams out of the red zone. UCF was unable to do that. Moving along here, UCF also gave up 13 field goals in the red zone as well. Not great. Just not great. It wasn't great. That ranked 14th worst in the conference. So they're going to have to improve on all fronts. Does that tie back to discipline? Certainly it does. And hiring Alex Grinch as defensive coordinator was a great start in correcting a lot of the problems that we think that they're going to have here. But red zone defense wasn't the only issue. This team was amongst the worst in turnover margin, dead last in the conference in turnover margin. And they were 13th in the conference in sacks allowed. The Knights gave up essentially it was like negative 197 sack yards on 28 sacks. The only teams worse than UCF giving up sacks, Arizona, they gave up 28 sacks as well. Houston, 33 sacks, and Colorado gave up 43 sacks on Shedeur Sanders. That's pretty incredible when you think about the season that they were having at one point. Again, going with the theme of discipline here, I just feel in my heart, this team wasn't that far away. They weren't 4-8. They had better than 4-8 talent this season. For whatever reason, Gus Malzahn was not able to get more than 4 wins out of them. Scott Frost, I think, can. I think the coaching change is going to be worth at least +2 wins on this schedule. Now, I won't go into the schedule. We've talked about that to death on previous segments. But when you add Scott Frost and Alex Grinch and McKenzie, Milton, you put all these guys together, just the renewed sense of, hey, look, we're better. We can be better. We believe we can win with the new scheme that's coming in. I think it's going to be worth at least 2 wins on the schedule, which, again, we'll talk about a little bit later in this show. So, again, you got to protect your quarterback. Tayven Jackson, Cam Fancher, Jacurri Brown, whoever's going to be back there, they need more time to go through their reads and throw the football. Now, I'm going to spit a kind of an advanced stat at you guys that you can't look up on ESPN, but time to throw is probably one of my favorite advanced stats when you look at what quarterbacks are able to do and what kind of time are they given to do that by their offensive lines. The average quarterback at the FBS level should have the ball out of his hands in under 2.5 seconds. All the statistics say if you're holding on to the ball much longer than that, it's probably going to be a disaster. Unless your name is, Lamar Jackson or Cam Newton, Patrick Mahomes, there are very few quarterbacks that are holding on to the ball that long, and good things are happening with the football. So you got to get the ball out. You got to make quick decisions. Every once in a while, you need your offensive line to protect for that just a half second more. The difference between 2.5 and 3 seconds may not seem like a lot to the average fan when you think about it in layman's terms, but that extra split second is a lifetime when you're on the field and you've got 300-pound linemen who run 4.7s coming straight at you. So, our good friend Andrew Gluchov, who was on the show, you guys, know he's no stranger to the show. He absolutely lamented UCF's offensive line. He did. And they played undisciplined football. They're going to have to be a little bit more disciplined. You cannot give up sacks in this league and think that you're going to win. But going back to, again, the defensive side of the ball, you also can't, you've got to create turnovers. You've got to create turnovers. You cannot lose the turnover margin consistently and win at this level. It's just not going to work for UCF here. Until you can close the talent gap, they've got to play more disciplined football than their peers in conference. And, hopefully that will pay off, down the road. The other thing I want to talk about today is opponent third down conversions. UCF allowed third down conversions on 42.7% of their third downs last year. That was good for 11th worst in the conference. So that's a number that's going to need to improve. Get the opposing offense off the field and get your offense on the field. That's going to be the name of the game for them. So, if you're wondering, Mike G, why are you spending all these stats at us? I think it's important. First, some of these stats deserve context, which I'm going to give you guys here. But you'd be surprised to move in to the top, I don't know, like 5 in the conference in third down conversion rate allowed. UCF just has to, improve by 4%. I'll put them in the top 5 in the conference, 4%. Were they as bad as the results? I'm not sure that this team was as bad as it looked at times. But with Scott Frost coming in, you hope that the change in leadership, the change in scheme, the renewed vigor, the renewed attitude, the renewed confidence that these guys are going to bring in the door will result in more wins in 2025. Nobody expects them to win the Big 12, but certainly they were better than a 4-8 football team. I think we'll see that certainly. But were they as bad as the results? No, they weren't. We'll talk about that right after a word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. The NBA Finals are over, but summer sports are in full swing. And whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I'm not much of a beach guy, so I definitely would love to be on FanDuel instead of all that. Get the app, and it keeps it fresh with a lot of new daily promotions that makes it fun for you to win. If you're new to FanDuel, you can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel.com to get started today. Was UCF as bad as the results? No, they weren't. They weren't as bad as the results last year. As a matter of fact, when you look at the schedule last year, UCF had 3 one-score games. Of the 8 losses. There were 3 one-score games that they lost, and it was super close. And these were really, really good teams. They just couldn't get the ball. As bad as this team was at moving the ball through the air, RJ Harvey was an absolute stud. Could they be close to something in 2025? And most people are writing them off because of the 4-8 season. But I want to talk about some of those losses that they had last year. You lost to Cincinnati 13-19. They lost to Iowa State at Iowa State 35-38. This was a 3-point loss versus a very good Iowa State team with a very good quarterback in Rocco Becht. Iowa State had a chance to make the playoff at one point that season if they couldn't have gotten it together, but they were unable to do that. And then you had a 4-point loss to an Arizona State team that they absolutely should have beat last year. The defending Big 12 champs, I'll say it again for the people in the back. The UCF lost by 4 points to the defending Big 12 champs, another team not a lot of people saw coming. Not a lot of people thought that Arizona State was going to be what they were last year. Obviously, Cam Scatterboo is a guy, and UCF just couldn't get it together. As a matter of fact, if my memory serves me correctly, he ain't playing this game. And they lost, and they should have won. Again, we're going to talk about discipline later in the show, but could Scott Frost and his staff be the difference between a win and a loss in a game like they had versus Arizona State last year? The answer is a resounding yes. When you don't have a coach who's going back and forth on whether he's going to call plays or not call plays, it absolutely could be the difference between a win and a loss in those games. When you look at the other 5 games that they lost here, now probably the biggest blowout on the schedule absolutely was Colorado. UCF went down 21-48. I won't spend a lot of time there. But, it was only an 11-point loss to Florida, 13-24. You had BYU, which it probably closer on paper than it was in actuality. Dylan Risk came into the game, I believe, mid-third quarter, played well enough to earn the start the next week. We were certainly advocating for that. He is no longer at UCF, so Godspeed to him. But, again, you lost that game 24-37, not as close as it looked on paper. And then you closed your season losing to a West Virginia team in shambles and Utah, 2 games that I felt UCF certainly could have and should have won. 21-31 to West Virginia. Rich Rodriguez has returned to the Mountaineers, and 14-28 to Utah. Guys, the only team really on the schedule that ran UCF off the field, I would say, is Colorado. I'd probably throw BYU in there as well, too. Love our BYU fans that come through the chat every year when UCF plays BYU. They showed up strong that week, so kudos to them, and congratulations to their team. But they look like they're going to have some changes at quarterback as well, too. That's UCF's last game of the season. I present to you Scott Frost could and should be the difference. Scheme alone should be the difference. And these are the players that he is choosing. I know Jacurri Brown chose to stay at UCF. And look, I commend him for that. But he got benched because he couldn't throw the football. And I don't know if the gap between where he is throwing and where he needs to be can put him in the driver's seat to be the quarterback moving forward. But certainly the competition will bring the best out in everybody with Cam Fancher and Tayven Jackson now in town. UCF they just weren't a 4-8 football team last year. I mean, that's what the results were. But I think that they had more talent than 4-8. A lot of people will come at me in the comments after this video and say, well, you are what your record says you are. And I would agree with you. But that doesn't mean your potential is what your record was. And they had better potential. Now, were they going to be Big 12 champs? Absolutely not. They were going to be Big 12 champs last year. There was a lot of parity in the conference, though. So they could have been in the conversation if, I hate to say I don't want to throw the previous coach under the bus, but if you had better coaching with more discipline and, a better plan, they absolutely could have been in the conversation, and they weren't. So with Scott Frost coming in, McKenzie Milton, the hometown kid, coming back to Orlando, I just have to believe that with more organization, and a renewed sense of focus, that UCF is going to produce markedly better results on the field next year. The Big 12 is prime for the taking by probably close to 12 of the teams in the conference. If that sounds, I don't know what a lot of people are going to say to this, but I just feel like there are 12 teams in the conference that have the potential to move it up and down the rankings, and UCF is one of them. So how bad was the discipline last year? I want to close the show talking about discipline. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On UCF. Will UCF be a more disciplined team under Scott Frost? I think they have. The answer is yes, and they have to be. When you look at some of the statistics from last year and you look at where they just weren't good, it points to a lack of discipline. Flat out, guys. I mean, UCF was the 12th most penalized team in the Big 12 last year. 653 yards in penalties in 12 games, 78 penalties, an average of 6.5 yards per penalty. And the way that math works out is that's 54.4 yards per game in penalties. Half a football field, you are being penalized every single game. Penalties are about discipline. They're about discipline. And if they can just play a little bit more disciplined, 54 yards could be the difference in a 4-point game like they had against Arizona State last year. 54 yards could be the difference in the game that you had versus number 15 at the time, number 15 Iowa State last year that you lost by 3 points. 54 yards could be the difference in a 6-point loss to Cincinnati, 13-19. You have to remain disciplined. And I know Scott Frost and his staff have spent this entire season beating that into these kids' heads. You want to play winning football, you got to know your assignment. You got to go out there. You got to play fast. You have to play confident. And you have to stay out of the penalties. I believe they can do it. This was the right move at the right time for UCF. And Scott Frost is going to get them there. But when you look at the results here, in some of the other areas that just weren't great, you had 15 fumbles lost. I mean, fumbling is a discipline issue. Fumbling is 100% a discipline issue. UCF had that last year. So can you stop this team from beating itself? Notice, discipline and talent are, not mutually exclusive. UCF wasn't the most talented football team, but certainly they had some fantastic talent at running back. You had one of, if not the second best running back in college football last year in RJ Harvey. Some people will point to Cam Scattaboo and some other guys who maybe had more yards. 6.8 yards per carry, man. 6.8. The only other guy in the country that had more was Ashton Genty at 7 yards per carry. I told anybody who would listen, I thought that RJ Harvey had first-round talent. They said, Mike G, you're crazy. He's probably going, and he'll be lucky to get picked in the 4th or 5th round, 2nd-round pick. And I'm not saying he was wasted, but certainly he wasn't utilized to his full potential last year. And if he had been, UCF is a much better football team with more wins in 2024. Now, you don't have RJ Harvey this year. You got Jaden Nixon. You got Miles Montgomery. A lot of, the reports that we're getting are saying that Jaden Nixon is balling so far through the spring and summer and is looking to be UCF's RB1 under Scott Frost. Now, you may not be able to get 1,500 yards out of him next year, but with a better scheme and comparable talent, I do think it's possible that UCF goes bowling. I think the over-under for this team is at 5.5. So the expectations are low. They're really low. And when everybody counts you out and nobody thinks that you're going to be dangerous, that's when you can be the most dangerous. And that's what I'm expecting from UCF here this year. So you take a look at everything that they got going on in some future episodes. We'll dig a little further into the stats here of last season and where we expect Scott Frost and his staff to improve this team. But I don't see a talentless football team. I see a team that needs direction and discipline. And with that, we'll see an improved win-loss total here this coming season. They've got to lay the foundation for who they're going to be 3 years from now, which will then improve recruiting. When you can point to, look at what we inherited and look at what we did in year 1. Look how it improved in year 2. Look where it's going in year 3. I think you're going to see UCF start to climb those recruiting charts, close that talent gap with the top of the conference, which quite honestly is just not as wide as some of the other conferences. Top to bottom, the talent gap between the top of the Big Ten and the bottom of the Big Ten is way further than the talent gap between the top of the Big 12 and the bottom of the Big 12. The talent gap between the bottom of the SEC and the top of the SEC is way wider than the talent gap between the top of the Big 12 and the bottom of the Big 12. That's why I said, look at all these teams. I feel like they had a lot of parity last year. And that's going to continue. It's a competitive conference with a lot of evenly matched talent. I don't think talent is the issue. I think it's the coaching. Who can find the guy? That's why the money has been flying around the coaches all these years. Everybody's looking for the next Nick Saban, the next Dabo Swinney. Everybody's looking for that next Kirby Smart. Because there's no lack of talent in this country when it comes to college football. But elite coaches are not a dime a dozen. They are much harder to find. Hopefully, in his return to UCF, a place where, quite frankly, Scott Frost, in not so many words, said he never should have left. UCF is where he belongs. And when you are where you belong, you can walk in your purpose, and his purpose is to coach UCF football. Guys, that's it for another great edition of Locked On UCF. Look, if you want more content like this, hit like and subscribe on the YouTube channel. We appreciate the support from all our subscribers. Drop a comment in the video after. Let me know what you think about the content, if you liked it, what you want to hear. And for your second listen today, go check out our friends at The Portal Show. Brian Smith has the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. Be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to the college football landscape. Find The Portal Show on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast, and find us here tomorrow on Locked On UCF.